Greetings, my paranormal patrons. This is the Monstrous Feminine Podcast Patreon, a space where horrible humans talk a little bit more about horror. My name is Zeba, and I'm joined by my Coven,
Mila,
and Louisa.
And this is our bonus episode for our Romantic Horror Valentine's Month. Thank you so much to our May Queen pledges on our Patreon for supporting us. Ty is not here this episode, but she'll be back soon. And just a heads up, the beginning of this recording was lost, and that's why our discussion launches in quite abruptly. Enjoy!
This episode, we are talking about the 2013 vampire drama Only Lovers Left Alive, directed by Jarmusch. In this film, two vampires, Adam and Eve, are reunited after Adam confesses his intense melancholia over the state of the modern world. Eve visits, and the two muse over art, literature, science, and music. Things soon become strained with the arrival of Eve's unpredictable younger sister, Ava. To aid their woes, their link to obtain a clean blood supply is suddenly cut off, posing an issue because human blood straight from the source is too frequently contaminated.
I think it's really telling that Eve speaks Arabic and is like in with the locals to get her blood supply. And for some reason, right, all she has to do is throw a scarf on her head and she blends in enough or let people know her well enough that you're right, that Louisa was saying that she apparently doesn't stand out, which I think is a bit ridiculous.
I mean, she just got, like, white hair.
Right. The same way that, you know, his character blends into this, like, white, grungy Detroit music scene. I don't know. They're literally parasitic, you know, like, in vampire sense. They suck the authenticity from the place that they're in and use it to make themselves feel, like, cool and interesting. And they've been doing it, apparently, throughout history, which is, like, pretty gag-worthy.
I feel like I would have enjoyed this film more had I been critical of them. I was like, this film is pretentious. I wasn't like, they are pretentious and they are you know what I mean? And I feel like...
It could be both.
Yeah, it could be, but I think that would have made me enjoy it a bit more. Or maybe that's like the critical lens I was supposed to go into it, because I was just like, oh, I don't get, it's just boring.
I thought it was quite a deliberate parody, but I found an article today that has come to conclusions I don't think I would have. It expresses like the potential racial politics of it in a much more eloquent way than I do. It's an academic, he's called Stephen Shaviro, and it's on his blog, The Pinocchio Theory, really interesting conclusions about like what he thought the film was saying. That I think some of it is giving perhaps too much credit to Jarmusch. It's hard to know because there's actually no interviews about it from him. They don't start off, but this is how I start my summary of it. They both live in what might be thought of, in brackets, third world zones, as if in flight from the sterility of white Anglo culture. And they go on to talk about the music scene in Detroit, like you were talking about, Zeba. Shaviro says, it's noteworthy how, musically as well, there is no reference to any post-1970 African-American music. Adam and Eve debate the relative merits of Motown and Stax Volt, but the only more recent American brands are mentioned are, significantly enough, the White Stripes. At one point they drive by the house in Detroit where Jack White lived as a child, and the White Hills. When people say that everybody left Detroit, what they mean, of course, is that most of the white people did. Adam lives in the ruins of a decrepit white culture, and he seems unable to recognize that anything else might be going on. So then he talks about Tangier as well, and it kind of concludes his point. In Tangier, more fully than in Detroit, which offers Adam nothing besides ruins and blood, the, quotes, third world is a resource that the vampires can consume and appropriate. Eve is reinvigorated through a sort of ever-repeating primitive accumulation or stockpiling of the local, in brackets, non-white, ostensibly non-European, in brackets, culture. Yasmin and the young couple at the end literally embody this dynamic. They are food and fuel for Adam and Eve to prey upon. In this way, the film becomes an allegory of the dead end of white Euro-American culture, which can only live so long upon its no longer active cultural heritage of Elizabethan poetry and vinyl 45s.
They said what I said.
They said what you said.
Damn it, now I like it. I'm not gonna lie. You and Zeba are making me like it.
The point is to what extent this is true.
I agree that might have actually been the intention, but from what you've said about him and like exploring like kind of that myth of America, But I think, like, I just didn't take I was annoyed at this film. Like, I thought it was pretentious, but I just directed it at the wrong thing. I went filmmaker and I didn't go characters. Like, I didn't think that the characters are annoying me. I was annoyed at the thing. But I think if I had gone characters are annoying me, I could have been a bit more critical with it because I like these points. And I didn't really connect the couple at the end. I was just like, oh, they hungry. Like, I wasn't really thinking. I think I didn't really turn on my critical brain for this. It's kind of putting it together a lot for me because I was a lot of it, I was like, why are they talking about this?
They're just like culture vultures.
When I was in university and we had to do the early modern period, I hate the early modern period. I don't hate Shakespeare, I just hate it being the hallmark of all literature when you're studying English literature. Because when I was in university, I wanted to study modern literature because that's the only time in the canon that like people of color enter, albeit initially problematically. So I was always doing modernism, postmodernism. It was so difficult to get the African literature books for my African literature course or class that I did. This is what I mean, like from where I am in the world, it's difficult to obtain just because of what we deem as like standard for literature. So I think I resent that body. I don't dislike Shakespeare. I resent him as a hallmark and I resent how overstudied he is. So anyway, I think like I was just personally rubbed the wrong way and I turned off my brain because I was like, okay, well none of this relates to me. So then I stopped thinking critically about the film like and what it might be trying to do.
Jarmusch, anyway, he is a nerd in that he loves the music, the literature, the film, the poetry that he references. Like, it's all stuff that he really cares about and likes himself. So it's not sort of like a flat out critique of people that are consuming these like subcultures. So that's why I think it is difficult to know like the line between him being self-aware of the practices of these sort of disconnected white people looking towards non-white cultures and art, because to them, is it like purely exoticism that they're having these profound experiences when they're, encounter these other cultures?
And he collects things.
There's also that sort of academic collectors mentality.
It's like anthropological perspective of things that they have.
They have to monetize it, they have to commercialize it. I guess rock and roll is a good example. They make music giving no credit to like the people that built it, that were Black musicians, and then they become the faces of the music industry, this cultural enterprise. So it's never good. It's really tricky talking about like white culture in Air Bunnies, because we can talk about white culture in terms of like whiteness as a construct, as like a thing that's used for like cultural power, social and political power, like that construct of whiteness. But then you can't say there's no white culture, because then that suggests that whiteness in itself, as in white people, are this kind of like purified state of being. They're above culture.
I think the references to race and the racial readings of this are kind of by omission. That's what we're reading, and the last very obvious like confrontation in the final scene, like you talked about, when she feeds upon the couple, they feed upon the couple in Tangier. Other than that, it's kind of like the commentary is coming from you reading between the lines of what's not there in the conversation. And I kind of wish it was just present in the dialogue a little bit. And of course, like, you guys with your big brains have read between the lines and realized what they meant. I wanted it a bit more spelled out.
I agree in a way that I think the like cultural cues that he uses in his films are for a very particular demographic, and it's in itself exclusive and pretentious, because unless you like listen to a certain group of music, you understand like this music history, you've read this William Blake poem, like you're not going to get the film, which in itself is like snobby.
I feel like that is a double-edged sword a little bit, because that is also the way that whiteness insists upon itself. Like, it insists that you understand it, right? Like, I was talking about this the other day with like a coworker of mine, where I'm saying, like, when we talk about having white authors and we expect them to be able to talk on a certain level about race, or have characters who are non-white and be able to handle them with care, I kind of said, when they omit things, when they forget, when they cannot write about something and so they don't, I'll always allow it. But I think that what's frustrating about that is the burden of like, I understand whiteness, like I have to understand whiteness inside and out to every degree in order to navigate the world. Like the expectation of how much I am supposed to accommodate white culture, not just like understand it, but accommodate it in my everyday life, like in all facets of it. Like if a white person's upset, I'm supposed to understand why. It's just not the expectation that white people have for anybody around them. Like it's not the regard that they have to people around them. So I think like movies like this are both about that and
Perpetuate it.
yeah, because like I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I don't get all these references, but I get a lot of them, and I get a lot of them because of like the situations that I found myself in. I find myself in academic spaces that require me to understand those references. I find myself in social situations that require me to understand those references, in like professional situations, and that is not fair. But it is something that I don't regret is being pointed out in media if it is being received that way. So like it doesn't rub me the wrong way. I'm just like, yeah, that is how whiteness is. That is how it insists itself in spaces.
I think people underestimate how much of whiteness is through the arts and culture, and that people who are listening to, you know, like this folk rock and reading literary classics. Another way to put it is like having cultural capital in a society where you can engage in conversations that put you at a certain level, whether it's respectability, sophistication, and normally that's things like understanding a Shakespeare play on a sort of somewhat deep level, listening to Tom Waits, Jim Jarmusch loves music. He normally will feature people like Iggy Pop in his films. Like it's this kind of like punk rock Americana culture that, like you said, Zeba, is essentially like the language of white people because they don't really have like another sense of cultural cohesion.
And you know what like is extra insidious and I don't even think people realize is like, okay, it's cyclical, right? Because punk rock is a branch of rock, right? And rock has black origins. And at the same time, here we are in a time where punk culture is being gatekept from people of color, right? When it originates in a genre that is of color. You create a situation where you're like, white people are insisting, this is a white thing, this is a white thing, this is a white thing over and over, and with time it becomes a white thing, and because white people are gatekeepers, they're now gatekeeping it from the people who originated it, and because they're so desperate for something that's theirs and for something that like is white culture, and we, you know, and like obviously I would recommend everybody read Hanif Abdurraqib's all of his writing, but he has very interesting essays about being a black person at punk shows in the Midwest and what that's like, because they're like very white places. He was saying, you know, as a young black person, he was very rageful, and these shows were a place where he could like get his rage out, and he was like a genuine fan of the genre, and it's like not a safe space for him to go a lot of the time unless he like brings other friends who could like back him up if things got physical, and things do get physical, like a fucking mosh pit. But yeah, that's all to say that like it's parasitic, and then like the gatekeeping is, I think, the cherry on top of like what's so crazy.
Because, you know, when they've just listened to Jasmine, her wonderful song, and Eve says, I'm sure she's going to be very famous. And Adam's like, God, I hope not. She's too good for that. There's that kind of like hipster need to keep things underground, to keep things unknown, to keep them, in a sense, like pure and in this little like tight community of like appreciation. And it kind of felt like almost it represented that little white bubble of cultural consumption that dictates what is good. Like the fact that for so fucking long white dads convinced us that Rolling Stones and the Beatles were the pinnacle of music is insane to me. People are so protective of that, like the music, art, literature, the films that represent that like stuffy kind of well-informed, culturally literate white person who are like cool. I think the coolness is a really important factor. Well, we were talking about punk, like the anarchy of it.
Yeah, it's so presumptuous too, because like I was saying this about another Detroit white native, Eminem. Like I was just talking to my friend about this, about how like people insist to me that I have to admit that Eminem is not just the best rapper, that at least I have to admit he's talented. And I always say, I'm like, I am never, white people have nothing to be that rageful about. I'm not going to give it to them. I'm just not. And I think my frustration comes from like taking something that was born perhaps out of anger or rage of oppressed people and using it to talk about your angst. Deranged. Like, well, Eminem's a separate case because like he's a misogynist, and like I physically cannot listen to his music. It like disgusts me, like genuinely disgusts me. I'm not gonna give him a pass for anything. Like I just, yeah, he grew up in battle rap. Yeah, he grew up poor. Yes, he grew up in Detroit. Yes, he grew up like around the people who created this genre, and he's probably as authentic as you can get. And I'm still gonna sit here and say, what are you so angry about? You're directing it at women. You're directing it at gay people. You're punching down, right? There's no way to partake in the genre without punching down. And all people remember is fucking 8 Mile, where he's punching on himself in that one scene. If that's all you take away from Eminem's lyrics, that he can make fun of himself, then I don't take you seriously, and you're not listening to rap seriously. Like, you're not an educated music listener then. If you are taking away from those lyrics that has anything legitimate to say. He doesn't. And I think that's true of a lot of angry white music.
I guess sort of just like throughout culture, whether it's punk, Eminem, like that sort of white anger like overtakes everything else.
I mean, but like men who not even make music, men who listen to music have this like superiority complex. I go to a lot of record stores. I buy a lot of records. Nearly every time I go in there, a man tries to tell me what I want or don't want. And if I ask for something specific, I get interrogated. They like, what do you know about that? I have to answer a pop quiz to say I've earned my request. It's always this like big show. I don't know if they would do that to any customer walking in, but I do think it's because I look young and like a woman, and like I'm of a color that they don't see around there often. Like, all of that is like, I walk out of there having earned their respect on most occasions, but I do have to go through trials and tribulations to make my purchase. But they act like you're appropriating their culture, and that culture is listening to music.
Shall we go back to Only Lovers Left Alive? And this was a point on their pretentiousness, because they were like so proud or like smug with themselves about this, but like when they like pretended and gave themselves aliases, and they chose like Stephen Dedalus and Daisy Buchanan, and they were kind of like laughing at the world for like using those references and no one would notice. These are the most mainstream references I've even heard. At least choose someone obscure to show off your knowledge. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, a lot of people were talking and reviewing about like how this film is about, you know, endearing love and long-term relationships.
But they were the most obnoxious couple I'd ever seen in my life. Their whole identities and their ideas of themselves were so pretentious that I thought that everything that they did in relation to each other was also part of the act. Do you know what I mean?
Like their names probably weren't even Adam and Eve. That's just what they call themselves.
Yeah, like I don't doubt that they had like genuine feelings for each other, but like the way that they interacted felt like, well, this is how the it couple would talk. Like, this is the topics that they would cover, and this is the things that they would do. But like, they obviously dedicated to each other because like they're ready to upend their lives and, you know, jet across the globe to be with each other, and they'll die together, they'll hunt together, they'll do whatever. But I just felt like, you know how he collects things? Like, I felt like they were part of each other's collection, of like their relationship was part of the thing that made them interesting. And it might be their most treasured possession, but it felt like a possession.
I didn't quite get that. I thought they had genuine feelings for each other, but I wondered, well, hey, I'm not giving this so much, but I mean, I thought that at first I was like, why aren't they together? Like, why aren't they with each other? And she made the reference like, oh, you missed X cultural event and you missed this. So it implied that they were apart for like maybe like a decade or even a century. And I was like, oh my God, it's been so long. And then I was like, actually, to be fair, if you lived forever, could you spend your whole forever? Like, they're no Edward and Bella. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, yeah, I guess you would probably just spend like decades apart as like a little vacation. So I wanted to read some quotes about the romance from various critics, and I might just like kind of do a whistle stop summary of them. So Scott Tobias from The Dissolve comments on how like little needs to be articulated between them because it's all so familiar, and that when love is eternal, passion fades into a more permanent and sustaining lifeblood. Sharon Shetty from Slate says this is not a conventional love story. The film's premise is one that denies romantic development. Adam and Eve, having lived in love for centuries, possess a rapport that does not hew to the trappings and rituals of finite human relationships. Their understanding of each other is total and comprehensive. There is nothing left for each to learn of the other, so we end up learning very little as well. The pleasure is extracted from observing them in their eternal embrace. A.A. Dowd from AV Club said that, basically talking about how the world changes around them, but their relationship is resilient enough to survive the seismic changes it's undergone, the world. And Brian Eggert from Deep Focus Review said, what could be more romantic than spending every day appreciating your mutual passions with the one you love? All of these people have reviewed their relationship quite positively in how it depicts a very, very, very long-term, eternal romance. So the New York Times reviewed this and they said, Only Lovers Left Alive is less about sex than about art. Vampirism, in other words, serves in this film as a metaphor not for insatiable desire, but for passionate creativity. Mr. Jarmusch imagines the tribe of the blood-consuming undead as a kind of aesthetic aristocracy, counting in their ranks most of the world's geniuses of painting, fiction, cinema, and music. Byron and Shelley are name-checked. A careful selection of books, including Don Quixote and Infinite Jest, are packed into Eve's suitcase, and Adam's walls are hung with the portraits of Buster Keaton, Mark Twain, Robert Johnson, and others.
They have terrible taste. I'm sorry.
It's just what they've been told. Goes on to say, while it is not specified that all these artists were vampires, it is clear that Adam, Eve, and their dwindling ilk are especially sensitive to certain forms of beauty. They are muses and ideal critics. They have a lot of time to read and listen to music while the rest of us sleep. Part of the pathos of their situation is that ordinary humans, Adam and Eve, derisively call zombies, have lost or squandered the ability to appreciate art. When Eve visits Detroit, Adam shows her the Michigan Theater, a once grand, now decrepit movie palace, and a symbol of his own malaise. His depression, triggered by the zombies and their vulgar ways, has brought him to the edge of suicide. Eve has come to cheer him up. Then they liken like they talk about vampirism and addiction, and then they say this line, there's something a bit musty about a romanticism that equates creativity with chemical dependency. But all of this to say is that this New York Times reviewer also obviously seems to hold those standards of art as well, like holds them in high regard.
What then do we make of the younger sister character? Like, what is she supposed to represent? Why is she there? Like, is it addiction? She obviously like overindulges in things, but I don't know. I struggled with her.
She's sort of like this, the less sophisticated archetype, because she doesn't indulge and relish these certain like works of art. So I kind of think she's, in a way, like, especially when she calls them condescending, is sort of a mouthpiece maybe for what the audience could feel.
She's selfish to a degree that it's like almost distracting. Like if she's supposed to be some sort of mouthpiece or voice of reason, I can't hear it because she's so unreasonable.
But maybe that's an example of like, okay, if you're immortal, there are certain sort of like paths you could take. If you don't have sort of like a time pressure, a sense that you only have a finite time on this earth, I think you would care a little bit more about people. But if you live forever, your perspective of like what matters in terms of your personal relationships really like dissolves. So maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's just another example.
I mean, she has a disregard for human life for sure, but she also puts everyone, it would seem, that she's around into precarious and dangerous situations, right? Like they have to dispose of that body, and obviously she knows that they will be left to clean up her mess and doesn't really seem to care, and in fact seems like defensive when they kick her out, which is like weird because like, yo, you did a wrong thing, you're getting kicked out, that is a consequence. Like she seems really unfamiliar with consequences as a concept, which like if they have to hide a body, okay, obviously it means they're not above the law, so that's one thing to consider. Like yes, they're immortal, but there's a reason that they have life that's so constrained by not just, you know, the darkness, but by their discoverability and their how they have to remain underground. And I'm like, how has this bitch not been caught yet? One. But also, like, she's so fucking selfish and annoying that like they come off as the reasonable, sane ones who are not doing anything wrong. So it's like she's just a weird foil for me.
You're right. Like it's hard to view the couple as like the people I'm supposed to be critical of when we have such an obvious person who's being selfish right there and who kills someone. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they kill someone too by the end, but you know what I mean.
I don't know how long the flight to North Africa is, but like that must have been a long time without any blood. I feel like that was really stressful when they like got there and the blood connect was like fell through. I was like, well, fuck. Now what? You can't Uber Eats it.